we're hardwired in so many ways to communicate visually. We have shapes and icons prepackaged in our brain, and our brain lights up in so many ways when we're delivered information in motion.
Hey there, and welcome to yet another episode of the World of Presentations podcast, brought to you by us at presentation agency 356 Labs, where we not only develop presentations and train people from some of the biggest brands out there, but we also organize the largest presentation skills conference in the world, which is called Present to Succeed. I'm Boris, the founder of 356 Labs, and your host for today's episode. And with me, I have yet another incredible guest from our industry. She is the founder and CEO of Killer Visual Strategies, a visual communications agency driving visual strategy and campaigns for Fortune 1000 customers and clients. She is also a speaker and presents at events like South by Southwest, one of my favorite events, and Adobe Max, which is a huge event. If that's not enough for you, let's move on. She also is the author of a book that's called Killer Visual Strategies, the same name as the company. And that book, by the way, was actually awarded Best Book Design of 2020 from Graphic Design USA and one of the best marketing and sales books of 2020 from the Porchlight Book Awards. So, who is she? Her name is Amy Balliett, and I'm so much looking forward to this episode. I'll stop reading the intro. Amy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Boris. I appreciate it.
So, what did I miss to tell about you? Like, give us a little bit more information about you, or at least tell us how did you ended up in the presentation world.
That was actually such a fantastic intro. A little bit of my background, I started out really focused on film and animation. In fact, I went to film school. And so I kind of fell in love with visual storytelling at a very young age and kind of pivoted my career into marketing just a few years into it and realized that there's this perfect combination of marketing and animation, and that is the true world of visual communication and visual storytelling. And so I started with launching my company Killer Infographics originally. That was its original name back in 2010. And we focused entirely on infographics and then started doing infographic video, motion graphics, explainer videos. We also started doing annual report design, interactive content. We just kept expanding our services well beyond infographics. So we changed our name to Killer Visual Strategies probably 5 or 6 years later than we needed to because we had already expanded so much. But our clients knew us as Killer Infographics. So it took us a long time to kind of switch their understanding of us from Killer Infographics to Killer. And then we could just add any words after the word killer from there for
Okay.
changing our brand.
So, was it a smooth transition from the client's perspective? Like, how did they?
Yes and no. It was a smooth
Okay.
transition from the client's perspective, but not necessarily from an SEO perspective.
All right.
We followed all the right steps to properly change the domain and everything, but we still had a bit of a dip in SEO for a couple of months.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
we're driven a lot by SEO. So definitely changing the name was that risk that we took a long time waiting for the right timing to do and the right partners to do it as well.
All right. So now everyone knows more than enough for you. So let's talk a little bit about the presentation space because that world is. We can probably talk about it for hours and hours. We find it very interesting, but the people that are listening to this podcast are obviously also finding it interesting in one way or the other, right? So there are a lot of topics that we discuss that we can cover, but we ended up on few questions that were not covered before. And the first one ended up being about the audiences, not about the importance about the audience in the context of a presentation, but what makes the audience different today than, let's say, 10 to 15 years ago. Like, there you can I think that people can feel that there is a change, but what is really changing there? What do you see?
Yeah, there's definitely a big shift. I mean, you could look at the shift in two different ways. You can look at it based on environmental factors, or you can look at it based on our own natural factors. So, from an environmental standpoint, I mean, when the internet launched, the fact of the matter was you could get a bunch of text based content out, but you couldn't really put a lot of great visual content out for some time. As more and more advances in technology happened, we started becoming a more visually rich internet society where we started sharing more visual content than text-based content. And then as social media really took all of our attention, we started to realize that the most exciting aspects of social media were sharing photos of friends and family and things like that. And so we, because of these shifts in technology, have found more access to visual media than ever before. And it's beyond just simply the internet. I mean, the fact is we've watched Netflix kill the blockbusters of the world and turn us into a world of streaming
Yeah,
media as well. And so there's the aspect of just our environment. We have constant access to great visual information, and every audience member out there has the power in their hands, actually in their pockets with their smartphones, to be creators of great content as well. And so that's why you're seeing TikTok take center stage and things like that. So there's the environmental aspect that really has given us a relationship to visual media like never before. But then there's also the actual natural brain science of it all. The fact is our brains come prepackaged with visual communication in mind. We're hardwired to communicate with one another through visuals first and foremost. We're not hardwired to communicate through text or even verbal communication. Those are things that evolved over time. Those are learned behaviors. But if you think back to the days before we had the written word, before we had seamless verbal communication and language, what we had was cave paintings on walls. That was our
yeah,
natural way of sharing information. And that's because visual information actually registers with the brain 60,000 times faster than any other form of communication that exists. As a result, it becomes the easiest mode of connecting for us because it's kind of that path to least resistance. It's the thing that gets to us in 1/10 of a second, whereas taking in a single sentence of text can take 4 to 8 seconds to fully comprehend. So it makes sense in a world where we're inundated with information all around us and where visual media is so easy to produce now. It makes sense that we would grow to a point where 91% of audiences today prefer visual content as their primary, secondary, and tertiary form of information delivery when connecting
okay.
with a brand or service.
Yeah. So what does that mean for the presenter? I have two questions actually here. Coming like from everything you said, two let's go with the first one because I think that will be a very short answer from your end because you more or less mentioned it. But what does that mean for the person who is listening to this one? That they need to push themselves to make presentations that are way more visual than text heavy, right?
Exactly. You should treat every single slide like a billboard. That's the most amount of information that you should put on a slide. Treat it as if people are driving past it at full speed. So 6 words or less on a slide is preferred. Granted, I mean, I've done slides that are more than 6 words. It's not always easy to hit that exact mark, but if you try to keep yourself to that, it will drastically impact how well your audience takes in the information and pays attention to you. But if you're putting up word heavy slides and trying to present to your audience, you're distracting them. They're going to be reading those slides while trying to listen to you, or they'll just start looking at their computers or their phones because they're not going to want to take the effort to read the slides.
Yeah, our brain is constantly trying to save energy, and yeah,
Yes.
it will make sense for them to not pay enough attention when something is that energy consuming. The second one was about you started with something very interesting that everyone now like everyone is having this exposure to great content and to great visuals and everything else. Like, do you think that just because of that and just because nowadays you see all of those great presentations, let's say by Apple or by Microsoft or by any other big brand, let's say, or by the TED. the some of the TED Talks on the main stage. Do you think that because people see those, the our audience's expectations are nowadays way higher towards each and every next presentation?
Yes, 100%. In fact, one of my favorite statistics ever comes from HubSpot. It says that 94% of first impressions today are based on design. So that means that our expectation for quality has skyrocketed. And I
All
think
right.
one of the biggest reasons is because we know what it takes to create good content. You could be a
Mm.
total novice and you might want to, put together a big Instagram following. You learn how to create great photos, how to filter them properly, what the right angles are. And so the fact is today's audiences are as much content creators as the brands out there are. So we expect brands to do something better than what we can do ourselves.
Okay, so what does the like we were talking about, hey, what it does it so everything that you said, pushing people to go into the visual aspect, right? And
Mhm.
pushing themselves to create slides that are way more visual than like they did before, or at least have this idea in mind that whenever possible and wherever possible, let's try to visualize a concept instead of writing it down,
Mhm.
right? Except for maybe if you're using PowerPoint for, let's say, documentation or something like this. There are always exceptional cases, right? Cases that are exceptions to the rule. But if we have to, you said something when we were exchanging some emails about the podcast. You said, let's lead with visuals and not with text. Like,
Mhm.
what's hidden behind that phrase? Let's put
So
well,
that's
let's put it here.
Yeah, definitely. That's the concept of visual communication. So, put simply, today's audiences are going to read about 20% of the text put in front of them. That is it. So, you can't really rely on text to be the thing that hooks your audience. On top of that, when I was saying that it takes 4 to 8 seconds to fully register a sentence, well, audiences have about a 5-second long attention span. So if it's
Mm.
going to take them 4 to 8 seconds to register a single sentence, that either has to be the most powerful sentence ever to hook them and get them to read more, or you have to find another way to connect with them in 5 seconds or less. That's why if you lead with visuals and you make sure that those visuals have information in them, so maybe the visuals are data visualizations where you're sharing some key data points that will hook your audience. Or maybe it's a really great illustration that shows a scene that your audience can connect with. You have to find a way to get that audience attention fast. It's kind of like thinking about book covers. We always say you don't judge a book by its cover, but that is simply not true. If that were
Mm.
true, book covers would not have any artwork on them at all. But to get somebody to even crack open that book, you have to have a good cover first. You have to have something that
Yeah, of
gets their
course.
attention. So it's the exact same thing. You have to treat every piece of content that you have as if it is your end all be all book cover to get them into your brand.
And because you mentioned the book and books in general, and because we're still waiting for our copy to arrive from Amazon, to be honest, while we are recording this podcast, like, is that like, what should people expect to see in Cure Visual Strategies? The book, I mean.
So the book is quite literally 10 years of lessons. I started Killer in 2010. I wrote the book in 2019, released it in 2020. It is a culmination of 10 years of experience running visual strategy for the biggest brands in the world. Um, it is not a book that is meant to be just for designers. It's actually meant for anybody who's trying to connect with and communicate with an end audience. So that's why it won a marketing and sales award because my background, as you know, is film and marketing. So I wrote it with an angle from a marketer's perspective as well. The book is in three parts. Part one goes over the basic demand for visual communication, why it exists today. So it talks about those environmental factors and it talks a lot about brain science. And in my opinion, it's important to really understand those things to know how to then execute the rules of visual communication, which are outlined in part two. And then part three of the book talks about how to hire the right people if you are hiring an external team, how to find the right freelancers if you're not a designer and you need people to create this content for you, how to build an in house team if you'd prefer to do that instead. And it breaks down the process to follow, as well as what you should be paying people for this type of content.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't seen a book which covers that last part that you mentioned, which would be very like. Is it tailored to the U.S. market mainly?
It's actually tailored primarily to it's in my opinion a very global perspective because we considered all of our international clients as well. So a lot of the lessons have information from experience with international and global work, but also for that part three portion. I mean, heck, I actually ran it past some of our biggest international clients to make sure it was relevant to them as well. So it is
No.
meant to have a very global appeal.
Okay, so that means that it's yeah, it can be applied globally, which is great.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that makes me wait for that book even more. Let's see when it will arrive because we ordered it from Amazon UK, and it needs to go in another address in the UK, and from there they will pick it up and bring it here in Sofia, Bulgaria. But we are used to this process. It takes 1 or 2 weeks more compared to if I was living in the UK. But at the end of the day, it works. So
You
it
see,
works.
I live in Seattle. If I order from Amazon, it gets to my house in an hour. That's that's what happens when
Well,
you live near the headquarters.
yeah, I mean, Seattle is another story. I would say that, like, every single time when I'm there, I'm like, okay, you can just feel that this place is so tech savvy.
Yes,
Like,
very
it is
true.
so tech savvy. But I would, if I can change something, I would definitely drop the prices in some locations in Seattle. Like,
Yep,
it's a little bit expensive, if I have to be honest.
just a smidge.
Yeah, just
Quite
a little bit,
expensive.
like just a little bit. Anyway, going back to the visual world, going back to the slide design, probably to the book. Like you said, that there is a lot of things in the book that are connected to brain science.
Mhm.
Like, if you mentioned obviously a few of the very popular researches around slide design and visual communication, what is, if you go back to the book, like, what is the most shocking or surprising stat or fact or research paper or anything like this that you quoted, or that once you found it, you are like, wait, what? Really? Let me think about it. Do you have something on top of your head?
I do, I do. It was actually one of my favorite studies. I had first seen a TED Talk on it and kind of dog-eared it as something to pay attention to if I ever wrote a book. And it's this study about teaching blind kids how to see.
Okay.
Basically, the focus was on healing blindness among a series of children aged 5 to 9. They were blind due to a genetic disease. They had found a cure to fix it. And this was the first time where scientists could actually identify how people learn how to see, because you can't have a baby explain to you what it's like to suddenly have sight and to take in everything around them. So
Yeah.
they were able to really kind of identify a few key things. One of the biggest things they identified was that our brains come pre-packaged with certain shapes. Like, we can identify a square or a circle or even a star without actually having seen one before. If we're taught the concept and then it's put in front of us, we can quickly identify it. So the theory is that we kind of have evolved to a place of having kind of universal iconography and universal shapes be something that we're just born inherently knowing and understanding. But then it dove further to find that when shapes were put in motion, it's far easier to comprehend that information. So somebody 2 days into seeing for the very first time, the eyes are starting to adjust to the world in so many ways. And what they found was if the things that they were seeing were in motion, the brain would register it far faster and comprehend the information in front of them far better. And what I like about that is it points to the fact that we're also seeing this huge rise of motion graphics and video online.
Yeah.
Cisco has continued to predict that 82 to 88% of internet traffic is video traffic. The very first thing you see when you hop online is video.
Yeah.
When you look at a motion graphic and you compare it to a picture book, 1 minute of a motion graphic is worth about 1 million words to the human brain. Whereas if you're looking at a picture book, you'll take in about, I think it's 36,000 visual messages in a given hour. So it's a significant difference. And I think that was the biggest thing that really stood out to me and always has, is just this fact that we're hardwired in so many ways to communicate visually. We have shapes and icons prepackaged in our brain, and our brain lights up in so many ways when we're delivered information in motion.
Which means that for everyone that's listening, which means that first of all, video and motion are and will be, if not now, will become for everyone like very, very important for your presentations for sure. And the cool part
Exactly.
is that I think that nowadays, like you see websites like Pexels, Pixabay, those Unsplash, where you can find otherwise copy free
Mhm.
photography, now having completely free videos that you can download and just utilize. So, like, and which also, when I think about it, which also means that people may need to push themselves to learn transitions and animations a little bit more, right?
Yes, very, very true. And the thing is there's also great sites out there where you can actually pay for transitions and animations as templates and use those. Video
That's
Hive
interesting.
is one of my favorites where, if a client can't afford something entirely custom and original, we'll point out, okay, let's find some good stock on Video Hive that would work well then.
Is it? Let me just write that down because that one I want to make sure that we link. So Video Hive is going to be the one.
Yep.
Okay. So you can get. Can you get a PowerPoint? Like, can you get a PowerPoint something that's in PowerPoint format that you can just utilize?
Not in Video Hive, but Video Hive is
Okay.
part of the Envato group. So
Okay.
Envato also has Graphic River, and in Graphic River, you can get pretty much any PowerPoint template you can dream of.
Yeah. I think I saw Video Hive like a few months ago. There was some ad that showed up on my Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And I was like, wait a minute, this looks fancy because of the movement and everything else.
Mhm.
And I went there and I was like, whoa, there are some really crazy files that you can download from here, or templates, as you said. And I believe that every single time when I see something like this, I'm not a designer, so I'm not coming from the design world. I was an IT
Mhm.
guy, but every single time, what we also teach our customers is, hey, look for inspiration. Like,
Yes.
you don't have to know it. That you don't have to know Premiere or Adobe After Effects or whatever to go to a website that otherwise allows you to download files like those
Mhm.
to scan for cool animation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you also advise the people that around you to kind of take ideas more or less from everywhere?
Oh yeah, I mean the fact is it there's always an opportunity to hear what a client really loves and let that inspire what we might produce. So, if a client's not going to take ideas from elsewhere, we'll go and create a huge mood board for them. We'll pull
Yeah.
ideas from Dribble, especially. I mean, Dribble is one of our absolute favorite sites as a team to go through and get inspired. And my team will often see a design style or an illustration style they've never done and challenge themselves to do it based on Dribble. So I think that it's a necessity to see the work of others to get inspired for what you can produce yourself. And the fact is there's always ways to take the work of others and identify ways to elevate that beyond what you're looking at. So the inspiration is just the start, it's the foundational element. But the best opportunity is to take inspiration from 10 or 15 different sources and then identify what you like the most out of those sources to create something entirely custom and original that just pulls from those ideas.
Yeah. By the way, for everyone who is listening to this one and is hearing the word dribble for first time, it is with three B's. Okay, it's not double B for dribble, but three B's, which is once you go in there, you'll probably spend a lot of time in that platform. Like, I personally lost myself once. It was a Saturday morning, and I was like, I really want to look at some beautiful things, you know. So I sat on my computer and I went for some keywords to look for some inspiration for something, and I went to the bottom of the search, you know, like it took me an hour to get to the bottom of a search and just opening tabs like crazy. And I was like, that's nice. Ooh, that has this interesting element in it. On and on and on. So everyone highly recommending Dribble and obviously Behance, which is
Hmm.
Adobe's platform, very similar kind of platform for visual inspiration. So all of that being said, that means that we are not like people are going to expect visual content for the future, and this trend, in quotes, is not going away, right?
Exactly. I mean, when I started Killer Infographics, one of the reasons we called it Killer Infographics was because we thought, hey, we're jumping on a trend. It's going to last a few years and we're going to have a name that dominates that trend.
Yeah.
Instead, we realized, oh, infographics are still exceptionally popular, and the concept of them is really what drove them. The idea of visual communication, the foundational element of infographics. And now you just apply that to every other type of visual content out there, and you realize that it's not a trend. It's actually kind of how we're all coping. It's our best way of responding to information overload.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of things to think about. I think if you're the business person or like the professional, that's because our audience are business professionals, business
Hmm.
people, not designers and presentation experts. Even though I know that our community and our industry is also listening to the podcast, so I know that you're listening, guys. So anyway, how about the brands, like those big brands that you also work with? What like you said that you also included in the book and all of that brain science and all of that stuff, like how should a brand, no matter of the size, right,
Hmm.
because nowadays information is like a commodity, more or less, not a complete but more or less, how should a brand of any size leverage all of those findings from the world of science to improve their communication? Like, what should they do? Should they have a person that's constantly following those trends? Like, what are your thoughts in there?
So I think that a brand should hire a role of visual strategist.
All
And
right.
I have to apologize from an edit perspective. My cat is getting into something and
Okay.
making a lot of noise, and I think you might be picking it up. So let me just move that from my cat and kick her out.
Okay.
1 second. Sorry. And then I'll jump back in and answer that question properly. Sorry about that. Um, okay. So do you want to ask it again or do you want me to jump in and
No,
answer?
jump directly to the question from like when you said, I think that a brand
Perfect.
should hire a visual or whatever.
So I think that brands need to be hiring a visual strategist. This is a new role that honestly, I'm seeing a lot of big companies really start to focus on, either a chief visual strategist or a director of visual strategy. It's something different than a traditional creative director. A creative director focuses entirely on ensuring that they have a great team that's producing great creative content, that they're staying ahead of trends, that they're ensuring that they're learning the latest software and things like that. A visual strategist is somebody who combines this idea of creative directing with marketing. This is somebody who's constantly looking at the visual content marketing angle of the business, identifying all the different types of campaigns and channels to connect to, and the right types of visual content to produce for those campaigns, for those target audiences, etc. So the role of visual strategist is a seemingly new role, but it's one that I'm starting to see really take off in the world. And I'm starting to see a lot of our clients look for the right visual strategist to hire, or a visual strategy consulting team, which is something we do often, is we consult on visual strategy as well. But that is really something I see as a big change in the world. I also think that brands need to embrace the fact that they have to switch their budgets. Right now, brands put so much budget into the promotion of their content, into getting it seen by people. But great visual content doesn't need a lot of money behind it to get seen. If it's really great, it's going to get shared. It's going to get in front of your audience with just a small budget as opposed to a huge budget. So, what brands need to do is switch their budgets. Right now, it's about 80/20. 80% is put in marketing the content, 20% is in producing the content. It should be 80% in the production of the content, 20% in marketing that content.
That's interesting. I want to go back to the visual strategist
Hmm.
because I the people that are listening will find it interesting. Like I have two questions there. The first one is there are people that I know that are designers who are
Hmm.
listening to this one, and they work for very very big brands. I know some of them that are listening for sure, or at least I will make sure that they listen to this one. Let's put it this way. So, so if they want to get to that role,
Hmm.
what would you advise that person to go and explore and learn so that they position themselves in that place where once the company is searching for that role, they are going to be the first person to get to, right?
Yep.
What should they know? How should they be prepared?
So they first and foremost need to know how to execute on visual communication properly. It's not something that every designer can do. In fact, we've tested at this point probably 1,000 designers with amazing portfolios, and we've found about 20 who are able to properly visually communicate information. So they need to understand the rules of visual communication as well as the key driving factors of their audiences. Oftentimes, if a designer is able to go get training in marketing, that will help them start to look at the world through that marketer's eye, which is really an important aspect of truly understanding visual communication as well. So, if a designer wants to become a visual strategist, they really do need to focus on expanding their education and expanding their experience into the world of marketing. They can do that through LinkedIn Learning. They can take great LinkedIn Learning courses on marketing. There are LinkedIn Learning courses on visual communication and visual strategy, so they could be diving into those courses. Not to toot my own horn, but they could read the book. The book Killer Visual Strategies is meant to empower all of the readers, and it's meant to empower marketers to learn how to be a visual strategist. It's meant to empower designers to learn how to be a visual strategist. So it's definitely one of those things where you do need the experience. You do need to at least learn the piece of or the career aspect that you don't yet have. If you're a designer, you probably don't have the marketing side. If you're a marketer, you do need to learn some design. You need to understand at least the basics of design to be able to creative direct that design. Doesn't mean you need to know the Adobe Creative Suite. No, but the designers who work for you will respect you a heck of a lot more if you do learn those things.
Hmm, that's interesting. So marketing plus design equals, to simplify it a little bit, but marketing plus design equals that part. That's
Hmm.
interesting. Is that like, do you include the all of the like do you include in that the fact that they would need to be looking for the latest research in the field of neuroscience and all of that stuff that will be part of their job description, as people would say?
I don't know if that would necessarily be needed in the job
Okay.
description, and the main reason is the research around um, our innate need to communicate visually is research that's been done for the past 200 years. It's so a lot of this, while there's net new research, it's not debunking the past research. It just continues to verify and validate the initial assessment that we are meant to communicate and connect through visual content first and foremost. So I don't know if you necessarily need to stay on top of new research in that arena unless it's focusing on new research with new media. So augmented reality and virtual reality. There's going to be a lot of neuroscience around those two pieces of new media that I'm really excited to start unpacking. And I do think that's the type of research you got to pay attention to.
So who should like where is these people where is these people where is this person sitting in the hierarchy? Like are they on the design end? Are they on the business department? Like where are they in the hierarchy of an organization?
Typically, they're going to live in brand communications of
Okay.
some sort.
Yeah.
So that might be marketing. It might be sitting right next to the creative director in a creative team. But I would actually suggest that they have more marketing chops than design chops and are able to really lead the marketing team, because it's the marketing team that needs to be producing this type of content more than any other team. We are finding HR reps starting to produce this type of content just to connect with their employees, just to help with employee training and onboarding and things like that. So, in that situation, if there was a visual strategist in the company that kind of straddled the line and just focused on communications as a whole, where they could have some oversight in marketing, some oversight in HR, and oversight in design, that would probably be the most successful situation for a large company.
That's super interesting. And at the end of the day, you also have nowadays tools like Canva, where
Hmm.
like you don't have to be a designer to understand. Like you don't have to be a designer to be able to build something that is very well done. Like
Hmm.
Canva, for example, has those incredible templates for so many business cases and business scenarios that you can get in when you are not the designer, of course, right?
Hmm.
Like professional designers won't probably go to Canva for help, or at least
Exactly.
I think so. But yeah, that is an interesting one. And you are saying that you're starting to see that role being up, like you see it already in some of the organizations that you work with.
I am. I've actually
That's
helped to
nice.
consult a few organizations on how to find the right person for that job as well. It's something that is starting to really grow in popularity. People are really focusing first on a chief level, so they're focusing on chief visual strategist. But I do think we're going to be in a world very soon where there's, junior visual strategist, director of visual strategy, senior visual
Yeah,
strategist, et cetera, et cetera.
the whole thing, like as with designers, junior designer,
Yep.
senior. Wow. So that will be something that I'll be monitoring for. I haven't been on the look for somebody because our art director, for example, in our case, I would say she is also a visual strategist because
Hmm.
she knows very well I wouldn't say like crazy well as a marketeer, but very, very well the marketing world, which is now when I'm hearing you saying that, I was like, that's interesting. That's why we are able to do this and that and this and that. So that mix of skills is obviously a winning, let's put it this way, a winning combo. And I would say, like for sure this person has to also be a great communicator, right?
Hmm.
Because otherwise
Definitely.
it'll be a problem. Let's see. This is food for thought for everyone who is listening to this one, both the design world and the business world and the people in the PR, branding, marketing department, so that maybe the next hire that you are looking for may not be whatever the hire you plan to be, but maybe it should be a visual strategist. Interesting stuff. All right. So Amy, in this podcast, we try to get a lot of people. Obviously, some of, if not, we will try to get every one of the brightest minds in our industry. Who else do you think we should get to the podcast? Like, it could be a business person that made an impression on you with their presentation skills. Let's say it could be someone that's building a tool, an author, um, great presenter. Like, just one name, the first name that pops up in your head, like who is that person?
First name that always pops in my head with questions like that, Nancy Duarte. She's a
Okay.
great person to talk to about things like this. Um, Talk about somebody who's really led the charge and led the way in the world of visual strategy. I definitely think she is just an absolutely fantastic person to learn from.
All right. I think that it's always hard to get to Nancy, but it's the second or third time that someone on the podcast is saying that we should get her. I'll personally make sure that we do that. It's obvious that we need to bring her in. Where One last question for you: where can people find more about what you guys are doing at Cure Visual Strategies, and what is the best network, social media network, where people can connect with you?
So to connect with me, LinkedIn is going to be the best way to go. That's where I spend the most of my time. On all the other social networks, I spend too much time doom scrolling. So
Okay.
I live in LinkedIn. So definitely reach out on LinkedIn. And then the website for Killer the agency is killervisualstrategies.com. And then the book Killer Visual Strategies is on Amazon.
Yeah, I was about to ask whether or not you want us to link the book, which is like an obvious thing. Okay, so we'll link your website, the link to the book for sure, and your LinkedIn profile, and we'll make sure that we do a shout out to the guys at Envado and Dribble, because they are doing incredible work.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, yes, they are indeed. Amy, thanks for taking the time. It was a blast for having you. It's already 40 minutes. I don't know how do you feel about it, but it's
I,
already 40 minutes of us talking about presentations and the future of presentations and the future roles that will define maybe
yep.
presentations and the presentations that become successful. I would personally do my homework in regards to the visual strategies and take a look at what's happening around me and our world here in this part of Europe, because I'm now curious: are there companies here that have these
Hmm.
roles? Thanks for taking the time again, and thanks for doing it. I think we need to connect again on, like, just spend a little bit more time on talking about the future.
I would love to.
All of
Yeah.
the things that you said about the AR and the VR and how they
Hmm.
will change. I was about to say how they will, right? They
Yep.
will in a big way change the industry. So if you're in for that idea, we can do
Definitely.
it.
Sounds good.
Perfect. So thanks again for joining. In the meantime, everyone who is listening to this one or watching the recording, everything is in the show notes of this episode. Check out our website too, 356 Labs and not 365 Labs. A lot of people say 365 Labs. It's obvious. 356labs.com, and also check present2succeed.com, which is our conference, the conference for presentation skills, which became huge. By the way, in the moment when we are recording this, Amy, this conference now has 3,000 people registered.
Oh my gosh. Nice.
And that is a first year event. So that is one of hell of an event that we ended up doing and organizing that we may need to get you on.
Happy to do it.
That is a topic for another email loop. I will send you that one after we end this one. So again, everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks to Amy for sharing all of that knowledge. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you liked it, and see you in the next one.